somebody.
Item 2 is declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations? Item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Are they agreed? Item 4 is the primary care network development, and we've got Katie Denton and Dr. Karen Morden who are with us and are going to introduce this report.
Hello everybody. So I just thought I'd kick off by talking very briefly about the last time we came to this meeting. So we finished off the session by talking about the publication of a new GP contract, which had actually come out, I think, a couple of days before we spoke to you. And this new contract represents a really significant shift to the way that primary care services are going to be commissioned and delivered going forward. And probably the most important element of that is around the creation of a series of networks in each area. So in Merton, we have now received applications for primary care networks from all practices across the borough. And we've been through a process within the CCG of reviewing those to make sure that actually the network proposals represent 100% coverage for all patients, 100% coverage for all practices, that they're geographically contiguous as well, and that there's various other bits of due diligence that we have to work through with that. Essentially what this means is that practices will increasingly be working together to support their local populations of patients to become more sustainable and resilient in the face of some of the challenges that are facing them. They'll also be employing a number of new roles, so there's funding coming down through the contract for social prescribing link workers in each network, for clinical pharmacists to be employed in each network, and for each network to have a clinical accountable director as well. And those individuals will be particularly key in feeding into local transformational programmes as well. So things like some of you may have been involved in the development of our local health and care plan, or in our Merton Health and Care Together programme. So those people will be key individuals who we need to bring on board with those schemes and make sure that they're able to feed into those commissioning processes going forward. I think it's important to note that practices in Merton had already been working together as part of network arrangements for around the last 18 months. So really what this represents is the contractual and the financial leverage to formalise those arrangements. So actually we feel we've got a really good starting point. Practices have already delivered a number of services, for example our integrated locality teams and our extended access services through these network arrangements, and so we hope we're going to be building on that over the coming year. The other bit that we were asked to tell the committee a little bit about was around the GP workforce challenges that are facing us both nationally and locally, so I'm going to hand over to Karen to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. Okay. I think it is quite important to understand the national picture as well as the Merton picture. So I've got some information from the Nuffield Trust, which is a healthcare think tank. We wrote about this a couple of months ago. They analysed a lot of data, and it's definitely true that across the UK the number of GPs relative to population has fallen in a sustained way in recent years. The fall is more marked in certain parts of the country, and probably follows on from a combination of factors. So for instance, things like insufficient doctors being trained and then joining the NHS, failure to recruit enough GPs from abroad, and early retirement. So some of the national differences you could argue may be justified according to variance in things like need, poverty, age and rurality. However, there is also evidence of deprivation linked inequalities in access to GP services in some parts of the country. You may also be aware of a figure that's been bandied around a lot, the national ambition set in 2016 to increase the number of GPs by 5,000. As nice as that might be, I think it's likely to be missed, that target. However, there is a glimmer of hope because definitely more medical school places have been created, so more doctors are in training, or students are in training to be doctors rather. But obviously we understand from that there would be a lag period, so it takes time to train a doctor, and then also if a doctor wants to specialise in general practice, that takes additional time on top. So although there's some good signs of the increased number of medical students, it's going to take some time nationally for those people to feed through into our systems. And the long-term plan, which I think is detailed in your detailed paper, also tries to plug the gap a little bit by funding additional healthcare professionals to assist with GP workload. So that would be people like social prescribers, clinical pharmacists, first contact physios, paramedics. We have got some evidence already in Merton, because we were a little bit ahead of the curve in relation to our social prescribing pilot, which definitely in Merton has evidenced some reduction in GP workload as a result of the social prescribers being in those practices. So that's looking positive. And some of our practices also already have clinical pharmacists in place, and some of those posts are employed across practices, so we're starting to understand how they can support GP workload and how those people can embed into our teams. So really the challenges around recruitment of all of these new healthcare professionals would be that the whole country nationally are all going to be recruiting simultaneously because of the funding that's come down with the NHS plan. Some of these disciplines have shortages in the same way as we do in general practice. And also it'll be a big learning curve, I think, embedding these new roles in our primary care teams, and also for patients to understand how these different healthcare professionals can best help them with their needs. So that's the sort of national picture. So what do we know about Merton? The Ipsos Mori National Patient Survey for 2018 showed that Merton actually scores reasonably on measures relating to GP access. I looked specifically at the questions that related to availability of appointments and patient satisfaction, and we were either benchmarking just on the national benchmark or 1 point below or a couple of points above. So that was quite reassuring. So for instance, things like choice of appointment given and satisfaction with appointment time, we were actually benchmarking above the national figures. And satisfaction with the appointment offered, we were 1 point below the national. So that's fairly reassuring. Obviously, we always want to do better, but we're not massive outliers on that data set. I then looked at the Merton workforce data on NHS Digital. It's all data that's in the public domain. There's a huge amount of data there, so if anybody is interested, you can log on and have a look. And it breaks the workforce data down in lots of different ways, and you can actually look at CCG level as well. So to the end of March 2019, the total number of patients registered in Merton was 223,276. And the average list size in Merton is about 9,700 or so. A couple of the data sets that I thought were particularly relevant. One was in relation to succession planning. There is some data relating to the the percentage of GPs over 55 years of age, and we are higher than the England average in that respect. So that's obviously something we need to take note of. Practices also need to be taking note of, and we're thinking about in relation to succession planning. Another. Of course, yes.
When you were talking about the other measures, the key performance indicators, you said you were a point above or a point below.
Yeah.
Where does it show with the other? It's over 55.
No, sorry. The first data set I was talking about was the Ipsos Mori National Patient Survey for general practice, which is done once a year. It reports in July, so I was referring to the 2018 data because we're waiting for the 2019 data. And there's a whole range of questions, patient satisfaction questions. So I just looked at the data set that were particularly relevant to access. So it was about.
Particularly interested in the GPs and the ones that are.
Yeah, so it's GP appointments. I can read them out. I just don't want to bore you. Okay. Right. The age bit was on another data set. The age bit came from the NHS Digital workforce data, and that's data that's pulled from a whole variety of sources, including reporting in from primary care, and it's collected very.
Are we to the national?
Sorry.
That's what I'm
fine, I can give you that number. Okay, so the England average is 19.6% of GPs by full-time equivalent being over the age of 55, and our Merton figure is 22.9% of full-time equivalent GPs to be over 55. Sorry, I misunderstood what you were asking for, you just wanted the number. Okay, moving on, the next data that I looked at was actually a measure of full-time equivalent GPs per 100,000 patients. And again, we're almost at the South West London average. The South West London average is 56 GPs per 100,000 patients, and the Merton figure is 55. The England average is 58. So we're much closer on that data set, both to our local comparable CCGs and the England average. Moving on a little bit, some other quite interesting data. On an annual basis, I looked at from March 17 to March 19, showed that the number of fully qualified full-time equivalent GPs, which includes our locum colleagues, had dropped slightly across Merton over that period of time, but our number of full-time permanent GPs had increased slightly. So this means that actually we've got more permanent GPs working in Merton over those 3 years. And again, one good point, the number of GP registrars, who are doctors who are training to be GPs, has significantly increased over that period of time. So again, that might give us hope around the sort of pipeline of doctors coming through. So the challenge for us in Merton would be to be hoping to retain some of our GP registrars once they finish their training. So we've got to try and attract them into Merton and keep them in Merton. So that brings me on next to how are we as a CCG supporting our workforce and trying to make Merton a good place to work. We clearly need to recruit and retain good staff, and my view of that is we've got to protect and maintain what we have and encourage all new staff to join us as well in Merton. So we try and look at it holistically. A lot of it is about staff morale. So we want to provide good working conditions, both contractually and environmentally. We want to support our staff to do a good job. The clinicians want to do a good job for patients, so we need to try and make it as easy as possible for people to do the job that they want to do. We need to support staff development and career progression. That's really important. And a modern approach to care through commissioning integrated services, such as those that Katie referred to, that we're trying to achieve through the Merton Health and Care Together work. Just a little snapshot of some of the things that we're doing as a CCG to try and support that. We have quarterly protected time for learning for all staff. We have numerous free training events that run across the year, educational events. We've got a CCG funded clinical leadership course, so we're actually trying to encourage some of our younger GPs, well, not only our younger GPs, any GP, but particularly people that are more at the start of their careers who want to develop their leadership skills, so that we've got, again, a pipeline of clinical leaders for the future. We've been helping to set up the PCNs, but that has been a bottom-up piece of work. We've been providing support, but the actual work generally has been done by the PCNs coming together themselves. We obviously take part in any national or South West London level initiatives around workforce. And we've tried to commission to support the areas of high demand in primary care. So that's same-day access. We've been here before and spoken about our access work. Work on diabetes, complex patients work, and care home support work. So we are trying. I think finally I just conclude by saying that we're also very aware of the need to consider health impacts of future housing developments in the borough, so that our practices wouldn't be destabilised by a sudden influx of patients. And because I think somebody mentioned that was a question that might come up, and I think Katie perhaps summarise how we actually try and work together to ensure that if there are new housing developments, that we're prepared to meet the health needs of those new patients coming in. Do you want to just...
So I suppose rather than try to sort of go into the detail of some of the individual projects we're working on, it might just help to let you know that we now have a borough estates group, so it's a steering group which meets on a monthly basis, and that has key stakeholders from the council, from the CCG, from our major providers as well as primary care. And so that's the place where all of the key estates projects, including redevelopments such as High Path, Eastfields and Ravensbury, are brought for regular updates, so that we can make sure that we're actually tapping into where there may be need coming up, and we can plan for that as part of our estate strategy, but also as part of our primary care strategy work as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm sure there will be members that have questions, so are there any questions? Rebecca?
Just in regard to access and appointments, with the new roles, sort of social environmental workers, etc., do patients have to, are they triaged from their GP, or do they need access?
So one whole would be triaged by their GP practice. So some of that may be through reception staff when you call in the first instance. We've also got a new programme of software that we're rolling out to allow patients who want to able to access services online. So there's routes through that way as well.
You know?
I'm really pleased to hear about the talk that you put into the GP's mental health as well. That's something that I raised last time that you guys were here. So has there been any thought about any particular reason why it's not an attractive job for young people at the moment? And is that because of the publicity about the stress on GPs and the media that may be putting off younger students from going to the GP area? And is there a way maybe making it more attractive to them by making it more flexible, perhaps, making it a bit, something where they don't have to just be a GP, they could be something else, that kind of thing?
I think it is still an attractive job personally, but you're right. Generally, there is a perception that that it may not be an attractive job. I think in some parts of the country, it probably is less attractive than others. And actually, the NHS digital workforce data is very interesting because it also shows the proportion of GPs that work part-time, the proportion that work just as locums. I think the traditional model of general practice, as I probably knew it when I became a GP, the partnership model is probably changing, and I think the next evolution will be the PCN model of working, and we're hoping that actually by working within bigger groups that either individual practices can support each other better, or there may in some PCNs practices may decide to merge to actually merge the practices, which at the moment we haven't got any indication that's going to happen in Merton, but I could see perhaps that happening. I think also improving resilience perhaps through embedding these new other members of the team with different skills, so that not everything has to come to the GP. I think hopefully that will help as well. I'm also quite passionate about teaching and training. A lot of our practices teach medical students, and I think we need to show medical students that it is a good and interesting and rewarding job. So I think there's probably not one answer to your question. In Merton, we've very much, I think partly because we're quite a small borough, we've only got 22 practices. Our practices do know each other very well. We've worked in localities historically, and we have tried to put a lot of peer support around our practices also, which helps. We try to spot if someone's struggling early and intervene as best we can to provide support. So I hope that going forward that people will still want to choose to be GPs. I know it's not for everybody, but we do still need GPs, I think, and I'm hoping that some of these new cohort of doctors that are in training at the moment will perhaps be shown that, particularly with an integrated approach to working, that it can be a good job, a good career. That answers your question.
May I just add to that? So quite a few of the changes in the national contract are also aimed at specifically encouraging people who've been on maternity leave to come back to work part-time rather than full-time, also to encourage GPs who may have taken early retirement to come back on a part-time basis, so that particularly the clinical indemnity scheme that NHS England has brought out is particularly aimed at that idea being that actually it's now affordable to come back to work on a part-time basis, whereas previously your medical indemnity costs may have made that relatively unappealing and unaffordable. So there's various other things as well as what we're
That's a
doing
good point,
locally
yeah.
to try and
Thank you. I was interested in the number of GPs over 55 years of age.
I think I'm on.
Oh, I'm sorry, am I talking?
Yeah, I think you can only have one microphone at a time. Yeah. So thinking about GPs that are 55 years or older, obviously one gets some comfort from the fact that Merton's about the national average. But what I was just wondering was whether we had any feel for how it's split between our 6 practice networks and our 22 individual practices. Are there any particular practices or networks which perhaps have a very older cadre of GPs?
I can't give you an absolute answer to that, but when I was looking at the data, you can actually identify that from the NHS digital data, and I did actually notice that one of our practices, which is a very small practice, has almost 100% of its workforce as over 55. So that would be if you had say two doctors and they're both over 55. So I think that's a very good point. We could actually look at that at a practice level because the data is there, and then obviously building from that we could actually do that within our, because we know which practices are in which network, we could pull that together. But as I said, when I was looking at the data, I did just happen to notice that one particular practice that I looked at, but I didn't look through all of the practices at that particular point in time.
Follow up. One of the things I'm conscious of, and it's partly behind my question, is that we have a disparity in life expectancy between the west of the borough and the east of the borough. So I think it'd be quite interesting to see how the GP potential shortfall matched against two halves of the borough, because it would appear to me that maybe we need to be, if we can, directing more resource to the eastern half of the borough. I'd be interested on your thoughts on that, please.
So I think generally we're very conscious when we make commissioning decisions about the differences between east and west, and certainly it's gone again. We're very conscious when we make commissioning decisions about the differences between east and west, and certainly a number of the schemes that we've brought out recently we're rolling out initially in the east, so that actually, because we acknowledge there's a difference in need there. As Karen says, we haven't actually specifically done that bit of analysis around the age of GPs, so we can certainly have a look at it. One thing I would say is that when you broadly look at the network arrangements, you do have different sizes of practices in each of them, though. There's not a particular network that has all very small practices or all very large practices. So I would hope that when we do that piece of analysis, we'll see that there's a measure of resilience around that, given that even if there was a small practice with older GPs in it, you would be looking for the other practices in that network to provide some resilience there. But we can certainly bring that back to you.
Can I just follow up on Stephen's question, which I thought was a very good one, and had you not asked, I would have been asking about this sort of point of the horizon. So what arrangements are in place to plan for that? I mean, it's all very well being able to look at a data set, but what do you do when you've identified that 100% in one small practice are over 55? And it's not so long since this committee was dealing with an issue involving some GPs in, I think it was in Park Ward, that kind of made a decision to retire, and things went very badly wrong, and we need to avoid that again and learn from that experience. So if you could explain what those arrangements are, it might be reassuring to members of them.
So I think So obviously the primary care networks are only just starting to form themselves. There's certainly a view nationally that they'll take more ownership over kind of ongoing resilience and sustainability of their member practices within their own networks. I think at the moment, as a CCG, we have a primary care quality group which looks at potential issues like succession planning and things like that. And as Karen's described, we've got a number of different schemes in place which we hope would support that. Ultimately, when there's a particular issue in a practice, we would do an options appraisal and we would consider all the different options. It would depend on individual circumstances as to what those options might consist of. So I know the particular one that you're talking about, it was quite a small practice that there was a proposal that the list could be dispersed. I think as part of the consultation piece with you guys as well as being key stakeholders in that, it was then decided that dispersal of that particular list wasn't an appropriate option, and as I understand it, that practice was re-procured and there's now a sustainable service in place there. So I think we would do an options appraisal piece, and it would be on a case-by-case basis how we would actually address that individual circumstance. But we have things in place that we hope are doing the right succession planning, I suppose, to make sure that we would have appetite in the borough to take on lists the issues that might come up.
So is it fair to describe it as reactive rather than proactive? Even what you described sounds to me like when it happens, we'll deal with it and we'll talk.
I was just going to say, interestingly, the solution to that particular scenario was actually a network solution long before primary care networks were thought about, because actually the practice that actually won the contract was part of a bigger group, albeit that the site was outside of the borough of Merton. So I think that was a good example of how a large organisation with a wider network of practices was actually able to take on what might be deemed to be too small a contract from a procurement perspective for, say, a private provider. Because certainly the experience, I believe, in London, if you try to re-procure a smaller size list, is that some providers actually aren't interested because it's not financially viable for them. I think moving to your point about reactive versus proactive, it's quite a difficult one because, you know, although you've got data showing a percentage of people or GPs over the age of 55, you don't know whether those GPs are going to retire at 56, 60, 62, 65. So it really only is a marker. And generally, contractually, GPs would be required to give 6 months notice of wishing to come off of their contract. So sometimes it is reactive by nature of the fact that you don't know. Someone might make their own individual decision with fairly limited amount of notice. Each practice has its own business continuity plan, so hopefully you would expect practices to start having those discussions within their partnerships, but for succession planning, but that doesn't always happen in real life. So the proper answer to your question is probably it's a mixture of both, proactive and reactive.
Sorry, you've asked my question. Sorry. My question's been answered. Thank you. Any others?
Can I add on to your question? With regards to workforce planning in the East, do we have an idea about vacancies, retention? Is there a difference between East and West?
I think the realistic answer is no. We don't have that data cut by East and West. We have the sort of the borough by borough basis data that's sort of nationally available. I think we do have, because we're very regularly in touch with all of our practices, so we have our locality managers who are out and about, we also have our locality clinical leads who are out and about. We do have our ear to the ground when there are significant issues of vacancies coming up. So for example, we recently supported 2 practices who had just lost partners to recruit new partners into the borough, so we have the means in place to do something about that as and when it happens, but I suppose it is always an individual's decision. So as a bit similar to the kind of the succession planning bit, when GPs retire, it's a bit difficult to predict all of the time, I suppose.
the other point I would add is that our GP Federation has set up a locum bank, primarily actually to assist with the staffing of the access hubs, but there have been occasions where practices have been in difficulty in actually being able to use GPs from that locum bank to help in the short term. And it's particularly good to have locums who work within the area because then they know all our local services and systems, rather than practice having to go to agencies where they would have GPs coming often from outside of the area and also costing the practice a lot more because they have to pay agency fees on top. So that's often not financially sustainable for them at the time to use agency locums.
All done? Thank you very much for that. Item 5 is presenting wellbeing at classroom.
Hi everybody. Okay, just to provide a little bit of context first. Obviously, Overview and Scrutiny carried out a review on loneliness and isolation affecting older people and made 7 recommendations as part of an action plan, and that was back in September 2017. So since then, we came back, Overview and Scrutiny asked for an update report, which we provided on the 13th of March 2018, and asked for another update report now. So this is the report that we're providing today. So in terms of purpose, I think there's 3 things to say. Firstly, it provides updates on the recommendations. Secondly, it highlights some of the wider services that are available and that can support sort of social connection. And thirdly, it highlights the priority given to tackling loneliness in the refreshed health and wellbeing strategy. So I was going to focus on the actions, if that's okay, to go through those quite briefly. So in terms of Action 2, which is around the health and wellbeing strategy and East Merton model of health, make reference to work around loneliness. So just to highlight, one of the key actions from the 2015 to 2018 health and wellbeing strategy was around the Merton befriending pilot. What we can say was the pilot was successful. It works by matching people, isolated older people with volunteers. And after a slow setup between 2015 and 2017, the pilot supported nearly 200 older people. We recommissioned the service in February 2018, and it's going to run to the end of January 2020. We are currently supporting around 120 older people per year through the scheme, with a similar number of volunteers. I think a few new elements of the service includes a focus on BME communities, physical activity and befriending, so we're looking at chair-based exercises and walking as part of the volunteering experience. And we're also trying to extend the offer to weekends as well. In terms of the refreshed health and wellbeing strategy, so this is going to the Health and Wellbeing Board later this month, and the strategy outlines a small number of key outcomes which it's going to focus on over the next 5 years. Just to say, loneliness and isolation was one of the 3 main themes of the Older People Stakeholder Workshop for the Health and Wellbeing Board strategy. And the new strategy is going to contain one of the key outcomes, which will be less loneliness and better social connection. So there's a real, in the new strategy going forward, there's going to be a real focus on isolation and loneliness affecting older people. The last element of this action was around updating on the Wilson redevelopment. The Wilson development includes a Wilson wellbeing workstream with the aim of the Wilson as a hub of wellbeing activities across East Merton. It was informed by the Mitcham Community Conversation, which happened in 2016, and there's a sort of issue and issues faced by older people, such as dementia, were raised as part of that. And looking forward, a steering group of local residents and local voluntary and community groups is being established to develop plans for the wellbeing activities that will go ahead, and MVSC are leading on the improvement of this as well. In terms of the next action, that's action 3, and that was developing an agreed list of voluntary and community sector groups. So a couple of updates here. The first update is around the creation of a wellbeing digital hub, and this is part of the work streams of the Merton Health and Care Together Partnership Board. So the idea is to create a wellbeing digital hub which will have a single point of access. It will include access to self-management tools and an electronic directory for both staff and residents. It will include support and services that address loneliness, and the aim is to deliver that online option by early 2020. Social prescribing also fits into this update area. So just, obviously you heard about it earlier, but just the key points I would say is obviously the service is being expanded and now covers half of GP practices. But interesting to note that 20% of referrals for this service were actually due to social isolation, so it really does hit home there. And finally on this bit, the strategic grants programme. So this is about promoting, the grants programme is about promoting social interaction through youth isolation and loneliness, and this is a key element of the wellbeing section of the prospectus. All 5 organisations that were successful are all going to support people who are isolated and lonely. There's more information about that in the appendix as well if you're interested in the organisations. In terms of action 4, that's an update on a practice managers forum on issues of loneliness and isolation. And just to say, that was held in August 2018, so Public Health and AGK Merton, who were the providers, both went to the Practice Managers Forum, highlighted about the issues of loneliness and isolation and why it's important, the health impacts, stuff like that. What the befriending service does, we mentioned, how to refer people to the befriending service, and other community activity that's also around as well. Interesting as well, which was quite good, we actually got them to upload electronic referral forms onto the database used by the GP practices, so they can actually refer them themselves. Action 5 was around innovative approaches to engage business. I think we've given one example, I think, which is a really good one, which is of Age UK's work with Able & Cole, and they're an organic fruit and vegetable home delivery service. So Age UK Merton, befriending organiser, went to visit, and they developed a recruitment drive with staff at the company. They got the company started looking at how they could offer flexibility about how they could use their volunteering allowance, so people could take extended lunch hours, and do the volunteering at lunch hour, or leave at maybe at 4 o'clock and do their volunteering in that hour afterwards as well. So they came up with some interesting elements really. They also hosted a lunch for all befrienders and volunteers, and they've got 8 people from that company to date, so it's been quite positive. We are also in Public Health in the process of writing an article on loneliness and isolation, and how businesses, and that's going to go for the Chamber of Commerce e-newsletter as well. Action 6 was around about an article in My Merton. So we published No Need to Go It Alone in winter 2018 in My Merton. This looked at the impact of loneliness and the services that are available for older people. We're also going to do a future article about the Wellbeing Digital Hub when that's up and running as well. Finally, Action 7, and that was about Public Health to host a seminar for counsellors on loneliness and social connection. This was held in November 2018 and chaired by Director of Public Health. And it focused on raising awareness of isolation and loneliness, the impact on health and how to address it. And we had speakers from Age UK, and I think what really made it a good event was we had a paired service user and volunteer who both gave their perspective on what it was like to volunteer and have it be befriended as well. So that's really good. Just very briefly, I just wanted to highlight some of the other services. There's a whole list in the report, but some of the interesting ones I think you might be quite interested in. Firstly, it's the Fire Safe and Well pilot, and this is a London Fire Brigade initiative. And what it basically does is add on health and wellbeing interventions to fire safety home visits. So Merton is one of 5 local pilots, and they've visited over 243 households to date. And this has led to 33 referrals to the befriending service. That's quite positive, really. They've also done referrals for falls prevention and winter walk advice as well. Secondly is a project led by our library service, which is called Tuned In, and that's hosted at Merton Arts Space in Wimbledon, and it targets men over 50, but it's open to all people. And it's led by a professional musician called Jar Wobble, I don't know if you've heard of him, and it allows people to get involved and play musical instruments. And we've been working with libraries and we aim to measure sort of some loneliness and wellbeing indicators over time. And it's also going to be useful to signpost people to services where appropriate as well. We also have a walking football pilot at Cannon's Leisure Centre in Mitcham, which Public Health are working with AGK Merton on. And although this principally is around active ageing and encouraging older men to get involved in physical activity, it has a secondary aim to kind of encourage social connection as well. So that's that. And women are invited too. Yes, they're not. And finally, just the community dementia services. So that's the dementia hub in Mitcham, which you probably know. But just to tell you, there's a new programme called Side by Side. This is where volunteers will work with the person with dementia to continue engage in hobbies that they enjoy doing. So it could be if you really like swimming but found it really challenging getting from the sort of changing rooms to the actual pool, a volunteer could go with you to the pool and help you get to do your swim and help you get home again as well. So there's some good things, or that could could go to your to meet friends or things like that. So it can help aid social connection as well. So that was it from me.
Well, thank you, Daniel. That was very comprehensive. I'm sure members will have some questions or comments to make, so we'd like to kick off.
Thank you, Chair. I was so impressed with your report and everything that you're doing, and I hope that you're getting enough publicity for it as well. So that's one part of my question. How are you getting that message out? And secondly, the BAME element that you mentioned. So it says here when you look through the back of your report, ethnic minority residents are more likely to be lonely, excluding those from the Indian subcontinent. So I'd like some clarification about that. And then you did say that your focus will be on BAME communities. So what exactly are you going to do about that? What is your focus and how are you going to help the BAME communities?
So it's national research around that looked at just a wide ethnicity. So I'd have to go into a bit more detail to review that and why some of the factors where maybe Indian or people from the Indian subcontinent are less affected by loneliness and isolation. Some of the factors might be around wider social networks. What they're saying for a lot of the factors that some BAME communities won't engage with statutory services or less likely to engage with those services. That's in national context. So that might be some of the reason. So they're not having access to, have you thought about coming to our club on Thursday or Friday or something like that? And just having from those interventions, having those other chats that allow people to signpost people to other activities. So they might just not be aware. But there's probably a bit more reading and research to understand the reasons why. In terms of what we're doing, we have KPIs as part of commissioning of the trending service around engaging BAME communities. Part of the answer will be around making sure that we have volunteers who represent different ethnic minority communities and sort of promoting that. And so AGK are doing some work around going to community groups and saying, oh, would you like to become a befriender? So that's one of the things that they're doing as well. So I think those are but we have, as we say, we are meeting our KPIs in terms of ethnic minority engagement as sort of benefiting from the service. I think there's more work to probably be done about volunteering as well.
Mary?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Daniel, for your report. It's quite intensive, but I am slightly disappointed that you didn't mention Friends in St. Helier. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
We do quite a lot of work with older people and to prevent isolation of older people. And we are one of the biggest groups now in Merton that's doing that. So we're right across the borough. We go from Lower Morden right over to Mitcham and every place in between. But I just want to say that I'm a little bit disappointed you didn't mention us.
Apologies for that. It was meant to be more of a snapshot. We didn't cover everything, so but I understand that.
Did you get to visit us? Friends in St. Helier?
I've engaged someone. I think one of you did some around fraud prevention. I think I talked to some
Right.
staff as well. But it wasn't. It was an oversight rather than anything else. I'm afraid.
Fine, thank you.
Thank you for that shameless plug, Mary.
Yes.
Are there any other questions? Joan.
Thank you for your report. Having a look at this, so there are lots, but what I would like to find out financially, I mean, how long these programs and projects going to, last for? Because what has happened, sometimes we do start this project, and within a year or two they dissolve. Are these going to continue to support financially?
Well, the project will run until end of January 2020 with a potential extension for another year. Obviously, it will then get reviewed as part of public health budgets. What I can say, though, it offers a great value for money. We see 120 sort of people for around £40,000, which if you benchmark that against a lot of other preventing services, they'll see a lot less. So we do very well in terms of efficiency, and I think some of the benefits as well.
I think it might be a good opportunity to ask the Cabinet member for most things, if he would like to comment on that.
Somebody can take up on that side.
I think it's a fair point, and we had to re-procure the befriending service. It was last year, wasn't it, I think? And we did ask them for a lot of data to make sure that what we were getting out of it was having a genuine impact, and I think it is. But some of the other money that we've had from the government, so to Mary's point, through the winter pressure monies that we had at the end of last year, we used that to offer all of the lunch clubs across the borough the opportunity to have some one-off funding to support more people over the winter period. And I think the intention would be to do that again this year. So it's really how you prioritise the money that you do have. But as long as we can continue to pay for these services, I think we would want to, because they are very valuable.
Very important too.
And valued by members and officers alike, I think, and the community.
And as a befriender myself, Chair, I would implore all councillors to sign up. Very valuable service.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, can I thank you for your presentation, for answering our questions, and for the excellent work that you do. We wish you well.
Thank you very much.
Item 6 is reducing the risk of provider failure, and that's going to be John who's introducing this.
So I won't take you through the report in detail because I know you've read it, so I'll just take you to the key points. The report sets out the responsibilities of the Council in the event of a third-party care and support fails. What that really is relating to is services that the Council provides to the most vulnerable people in our society. So it's care homes, nursing homes, that people are living, people's homes, and of course home care providers, carers going into people's houses. So it's key for us that we get it right. Why it's important as well, a lot of you remember 2009, the collapse of Southern Cross, a huge care home provider across England, and that resulted in the government giving us some legislation around the Care Act, around market shaping and market failure. So we have a statutory duty around provider failure. Very recently as well, we've had another huge home care provider across England near to collapse in November, Allied Home Care. They provided, I was just checking it just now, 1,600 hours of care to 109 clients in Merton, and nearly overnight we were told by the Care Quality Commission they would be closing possibly within a month. For us to find that level of care to support those people is a huge undertaking at a time when the market is in crisis. What we want to do is, we don't want to go there at the end when our provider is failing. We want to work with them earlier. So our whole purpose is to work with the provider earlier, to monitor them, to support them, to find out if they're doing well, if they're not doing so well, and to work with them. And we recognised that in our target operating model, it's one of our key things around commissioning, how we buy things, in contract monitoring, that we needed some more resource. So we've put a head of service, a head of commissioning into the adult social care, who would have overall responsibility on monitoring and in the work with the market. We've also put more commissioning into the service, the people that buy things that adult social care need, and our contract monitors, we put an extra 3 posts in as well, so that we've got people actually working with the providers to stop them from failing. Might not happen, but our intention is that we work with them, provide them the support, work with our Care Quality Commission and our other providers to actually bring them up to a decent level. One of the things, that the key points that we find with Allied, the paper details the responsibilities of the Care Quality Commission for large providers and of course the Council, but ultimately what we found with Allied was that the responsibility, while the Care Quality Commission were monitoring it and guiding it, the responsibility came back to the Council. So it is an area that we need to get correct. You've read the report, and I'm now open to questions. I didn't have anything else to say.
Any questions? John?
It's not a question either, thank you. Just first to say thank you. I think on 3 occasions I've written to the group, and within less than 24 hours response. Thank you very much for that. And that's what we need. We need communication, we need fast working, and that's how we end up getting our work done properly. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Any questions on this item? Yeah. Steve.
Thank you. Obviously we've got a range of service providers. If I've understood it correctly, the large ones are primarily responsibility of the Care Quality Commission. It sounds a bit like they don't give us much notice of their intelligence, so that kind of puts us under pressure. And then the smaller ones are responsibility anyhow, so we've obviously got a responsibility there. I guess what I'm wondering is, have we got some kind of risk rating traffic light system? Do we know who are our service providers who are highest risk compared to those who are lowest risk, and have we kind of graded them from 1 to 100 sort of thing?
I'll respond to that, Chair. So thank you for your question. Just so we're absolutely clear, so in relation to councils and local authorities, it's individual contracts with providers. So each provider is independent. They operate their business, they have a business model, they will bid for work, and through procurement processes we appoint those contractors to deliver the work. The role of the CQC is to regulate. So there are 2 very, very different roles. And I think some of the discussions we've been having with CQC following on from Allied, because the London Borough of Merton was one of the London authorities quite badly affected because of the numbers of people and the number of care hours that we were looking at, is that early intelligence. I think it can be quite challenging because it's how much information CQC is given at an early stage. I think they're pretty quick at responding to the information, but the likelihood of getting earlier notices is either 2 things. CQC does a visit and they're concerned, so they will alert you pretty quickly, or the care business itself will alert CQC that financially the books haven't stacking up and they're in trouble. I think the point John has made in his report is absolutely critical. It is our duty under the Care Act to ensure that we're working with local providers. What we don't want to do is when a care home gets a bad rating, go in heavy-handed, because actually that doesn't help the market. And the post that John described that he's put into commissioning is the roles where you've got our commissioners are going out to the providers more often. We're not just reliant on CQC to work with those providers around staffing, making sure the quality and care of the home is where we would want to place our own relative if we needed to place, or give them the home care that we would want for our very own. So I think the quality monitoring from the local authority side is as critical as the regulatory role of the CQC, and you need both to work together.
If I could just come in behind that, and that is just following up from Stephen's point. I mean, you've talked about regulatory monitoring and quality monitoring. What about financial monitoring? Are they required as part of the contract to provide information about the financial health of the business? Do we know, for example, if there is a consistent pattern of deficits, or that they've got an excessive debt loading on the business that is potentially causing distress down the line? And is there somebody within your department that actually has responsibility for that kind of intelligence gathering?
Due diligence, of course, with a contract, we will be checking to make sure that before we place someone or before we have a contract, that they're a sound financial business. But as the years go on, perhaps we're not so good at doing that. Sorry.
I think there's two roles. The role of the contract is what John described. So when you appoint, I think about 2 years ago, we went through a whole procurement process of home care. So that's where you do the due diligence, the financial monitoring, making sure the business is sound. We actually don't have a right to ask for that information as the contract owner. But that is part of the CQC regulation. So when it's the different roles between the regulator and us as a contract monitoring. So our job is to make sure that those contracts are working. CQC's job is to make sure they regulate, and they cover everything right through to the financial detail of the company. So they will do all the monitoring with Company House where they're registered, and that's how a lot of the intelligence comes to light if it's the financial business that goes down. But I think from our experience, especially with Allied, it wasn't just the money. It's a whole range of things when these things happen. A lot of it was around workforce and getting permanent staff to work within the home care business, which we know it's probably not a great paid job, not a great career prospect, hard work, and we had seen a lot of our EU residents that was working in home care had moved back to their country of origin in the EU. So the market at that time was quite volatile anyway. It wasn't just in Merton, it was nationally and London. But I think going back to your point, Chair, the critical bit in any local area when you drill down into your borough has got to be that you build that relationship with your providers in the borough, so you know who your providers are, and you want that relationship of trust that actually if they think they're in trouble, they come to you early on. So we've set up some provider forums, so we meet with all the providers now, every quarter, all the care agents, so every care home in the borough, we invite their providers in 4 times a year. And that's how I think you build the relationship, so that it's if they are in trouble, they come to you. It's very difficult if you have engaged and awarded a contract. Yes, you have the reporting on the contract. Actually, to get the financial detail of businesses, it's not that straightforward. But as part of the regulator role, the CQC can insist. They don't always. That's some of the challenge. It's the duties of the Care Act for the local authority, but then it's the CQC duties as well. So not as straightforward, and it's a bit challenging to explain it any better than that, but it does go down into the regulatory stuff.
Any other questions?
Okay, one quick one, please. Issues where care providers have got themselves or think they may be getting into difficulties. have they actually been coming forward in recent years and saying to Merton, look, we do have a problem, is there anything Merton can do?
So in my time here, I would say we had one care home where their CQC visit it resulted in requiring improvement, and they worked incredibly well with the council. In actual fact, we were running with a number of vacancies because people just did not want to place their loved one in there, which, as you can understand, if you're going to put mom, dad, or your sister in care, or your brother, you've got to check the CQC rating of that environment. So our residents were telling us clearly, no, we do not want mom or dad placed in there. So we worked with them it took us about 6 to 8 months to turn it around with them, but we worked very well. The home care market, when Allied went under just prior to Christmas, because we were hitting the winter pressure, and the other home care providers in the borough were very honest with us in terms that financially they were okay, but they didn't have surplus. So we had a contingency plan that if they required surplus through the winter period, we would use the winter pressure monies to do that. One other point I just want to make in relation to what John said, point out to me, but also just in relation to the earlier questions about financial sustainability, there is a duty upon us under the Care Act that if they fail, we have to step in. So if you have a small provider in a borough that goes under, if through the regulation process of the CQC, no other organisation takes them over, we have a duty to step in and run that organisation until we sort it out, because obviously this is people's care.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, John, for that. And item 7 is transition to children's health services for children with special educational needs and disability task group final report. That's Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. I know it was only at our last meeting that I provided an update on the work of the task group, but I'm really pleased to say that within that time we've met with the Cabinet members and officers from adults and children's services, in addition to environment and regeneration, and the recommendations you see in the report, a summary of which you can find on pages 42 to 45, have been agreed in principle ahead of reporting to Cabinet next month. And I appreciate the composition of the panel has changed somewhat since we last met, so not everyone will have background to the review. So I'll provide a brief update on why and how the review came to be, in addition to touching on the final recommendations that you'll see in the report. So as some of you will remember, the panel agreed to undertake a task group review into transition from children's to adult services without necessarily predetermining what area would be focused on. So as a task group, we agreed that the greatest need was transition for young people with special educational needs and disability. And there were a number of reasons why we chose this area. So not only did we choose transitions for young people with special educational needs and disability because they represent 15% of children in England, yet they're 3 times more likely to lack a close friend, 7 times more likely to be excluded, twice as likely to experience persistent bullying most days at school, and 4 times more likely to experience mental health problems than their non-SEND peers. And nor did we only choose this area because when these young people do actually reach adulthood, they're twice as likely to be living in poverty, 4 times more likely to be single, and while far less likely to be employed, if they do have a job, it will likely be part-time and poorly paid. And while I hope you'd agree that these are sufficient reasons to explore this area in greater detail, there were 3 additional reasons that we decided to pursue transitions for young people with SEND, and these were firstly that recent and significant change followed the Children and Families Act of 2014 and the associated SEND Code of Practice. The second is that there was an increasing demand for these services in Merton, and finally what was at the start of our review an upcoming CQC and Ofsted inspection. But we knew that an inspection was going to be due before 2021, and also that local areas had generally performed quite poorly. So out of 68 inspections, just under half of those had failed, including our neighbouring borough of Sutton. But we now know that Merton had its inspection on SEN provision last week, and while I know that the result of that is still unknown at this stage, we hope that these recommendations will help to inform the continued work that both adults and children's services are undertaking around special educational needs and disability. And we hope that we can make a meaningful difference into the lives of young people, their families and their carers. And as you'll see from the report, we were fortunate enough to have spoken to a wide range of stakeholders. So from a national perspective, also from the local service provision level, both statutory and voluntary, and of course one of the most central stakeholders, the parents of children who have experienced transition in the borough. As I'm sure you can appreciate, and I think that Diane and Stella can attest, this has been a really complex and emotive area, with responsibility also lying across a vast majority of sort of different departments and agencies, which can prove quite challenging in delivering a simple service to young people and their families. But hearing from witnesses over the last few months, 7 key themes emerged that you'll see across the report, under which we've developed a series of recommendations. And as you'll have the report in front of you, I won't go through the recommendations in any detail, but we'll briefly touch on a couple of the themes. So firstly, at each meeting, the importance of open and clear communication was raised. So we've indicated in collaboration with stakeholders throughout the process ways that we think we can improve information available to families, including a helpline number and address, improving the visibility of services available, and also publishing a glossary of acronyms and abbreviations. And this falls under the second theme, which, as you can see, contains quite a number of different recommendations to help improve both the clarity and the accessibility of information on the local offer website. Another theme that emerged was how to enable families to navigate transitions. This was because there was general consensus that services, including adults and children's services, could better plan and prepare for transition at an earlier stage. Which we also had the potential to support internal capacity planning, as well as helping families to prepare better for the future. So as such, one of our recommendations includes a pilot project where there would be a named social worker appointed to the SEND team, and this person would then provide direction to the young person with substantial needs in Year 9 who are currently in receipt of children's social care but unlikely to meet the national eligibility threshold for adult services, to help them better navigate the process. And on a similar theme, the fifth theme hopes to provide sort of a safety net for those young people who may not meet that national threshold for care from adult social care, but who may be potentially at risk from re-entering the system, but we don't necessarily know that. And the final theme I'll touch on is the sixth, which is around promoting independence and preparing for adulthood. And the Code of Practice says, and I quote, "The vast majority of young people with SEN are capable of sustainable paid employment with the right preparation and support." And the task group generally very strongly supported increasing and promoting opportunities to young people to build those skills and independence. So our recommendations include encouraging the expansion of work placements, apprenticeships and voluntary opportunities in the borough through outreach to local employers, educational establishments and trade bodies. And in terms of next steps, as I mentioned at the start, we've spoken with cabinet members and officers who have agreed the report as it currently stands, and we'll be shortly presenting to cabinet, but I'm very happy to take any questions if there are any at this stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that presentation, and to your task group for the work, the important work that you've undertaken. It really is. Are there any questions?
Right, first thing I want to say is a good job with your report, and I want to say, thank you for, writing this out, because it's a platform on my own. Personal, experience, because I've been tours from a screen school to a special school, and then suddenly going to university, and then into full-time employment. And each of those stages, it was a massive challenge, and I've can I see all the bars face, and I had to find a way to overcome it. Anyway, in your report, which is great, but I've got a number of questions if I may ask. Okay, and number 6 in promoting, and employment and voluntary, and how would you encourage the young student with disability? Is that just across merchant? Are there employers out there who might be seen helping the disabled people? And speaking from experience, they would more likely to take on for a free trial and see what their abilities are, and then they will take them on full time. Do you have any plans on this? Oh, what's that?
So in terms of promoting employment and volunteering opportunities, is it that you think that a pilot scheme that allows someone to go into full employment afterwards possibly works better than these? I think one of the things that we found, particularly with the educational opportunities, is that we really wanted to promote there being a scheme once someone has gone through that education to have a sort of a work placement afterwards, to allow them to experience that and then potentially stay on after that. So that sort of acting as a pilot, and then to allow to go into sort of full employment if that employer were to allow it. But we also wanted to explore the opportunities of actually working with local employers and sort of educational establishments in the borough to see whether they would be open to it, because it might be that the discussion hasn't been had and they might not have realised that they could provide something like that. So it's as much as we can providing those tools to allow that to happen. But I think the first part of this will be having the conversation to determine how feasible that would be, and then seeing where that relationship goes, if that answers that question.
Right. That's fine. Next question is under number 11. Why are just at Merchant Library? Because there are loads of other places.
Sorry, Councillor. Which recommendation was that?
On page 45, under number 11, is mentioned you're encouraging people and employment in merchant libraries. Why merchant libraries? Is that
as opposed to other boroughs?
Yeah.
Or, I think because the task group was generally just looking at Merton. It's what I think we have influence over. So in terms of the libraries, we obviously are able to influence what our offer is there. We know that we have a really great voluntary base at the library, so it's an opportunity to build on that for young people. But I don't think that we could necessarily require, for example, Wandsworth borough libraries to do a similar scheme. It would be hopefully, that we can spread best practice. If we do it here and do it really well, then maybe other boroughs would want to take it up. But I think we're somewhat restricted in terms of the terms of our task group, how far we can influence.
Okay, thank you. yes, this one. The number 7. Yeah, last one. Yeah, last one. Is it supported by the council in terms of travel expenses?
Recommendation 12 around the travel training.
Yeah, is it supported by the council, not just in Merton, but also across other boroughs into special schools which were miles away from home. And I want to know more about the in terms of the trouble. Yes, in trouble.
I think my understanding is that Merton does spend quite a lot on travel for young people to travel to school, especially in terms of sort of out of borough placements. But I know that it's part of the strategy to ensure that fewer young people are having to travel outside of the borough. But Merton, as far as I'm aware, does also commission Merton MenCap in terms of travel training as well.
So the Department of Transport used to commission this, so they used to give local authorities the money to travel, and unfortunately they stopped doing it. Some time ago, I think about 3 years ago, the money went. However, I think the position Merton has taken is the value in actually supporting young people to travel safely. So we still provide in the Borough of Merton up to the age of 18, and that includes working with parents to train parents and carers as well how to enable people to travel safely. We have commissioned a transport review, and I'm sure this will be forming part of it, because the more people we can actually get to travel independently, it's better, and it's better for themselves and their self-confidence and their independence. So it's an area that it goes back, I think, to Dan's earlier point around kind of preventing loneliness, and your point, Councillor Henry, about sometimes we start these things and then we stop them. But if this is about preventing and reducing the need for having a travel companion or having to get on a bus and be taken somewhere, then surely that investment has got to account at the early stages. But yes, it used to be the Transport of London.
Okay, right. Thank you. Two more questions and then we'll stop. Is it possible with M-card? I've never heard of it. With M-card, that's on page 43 under F. 43F. What is M-card?
I think my understanding is
my understanding is that it's a card that provides other sort of activities and opportunities for young people. I don't know whether Hannah or John might be able to expand more on that.
So I'm going to take a chance on this. I think it is like a prepaid card. And you're right, it's for travel and other activities, but we can get that confirmed from colleagues in Children's Services, but that's my understanding of the MEN card.
Is it around Merchant area, or is it other borough?
We'll find out.
Okay, final question, sorry, which is I think I remember. Yes. Let me get somewhere. sure if I say it quickly. I fully agree and encourage having parents, brothers and sisters to visit the special schools because it will give them a better understanding on the child, special need. And which is great, but this training has been given to the potential employers as well.
Is this about travel training? Is it just general training?
It is about giving understanding the personal needs, special needs, and somewhere on there it says having people visit, giving support, and I fully agree with this because in the part I have my brothers, come and give them a better understanding, but there's nothing in there that says about for the employers.
So I think that was something that we explored as part of recommendation 10, so trying to expand work placements and outreach to local employers. Sorry, it's page 44 and it's recommendation 10. So we haven't explicitly within that talked about support being provided to employers, just because we were looking at what we can do within, as possible at present within current resources. So we wanted to look at, what are things and structures that are already set up that can help us start this journey. So it's about making sure that we're liaising and establishing links with local employers, and then the next step sort of comes from there. But it's trying to start that journey, and I think that's what this report will hopefully look to achieve. But I completely take your point. It's an aspiration, I think.
I totally agree because wherever I went, every jobs I went on my first day, people were quick to judge, but over time I was able to prove, them wrong, and that's it. That's the fact of life. Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I can update you on the M card.
That was quick.
Due to the joys of Google, I can update you on the M card. If a young person is eligible, if they're on the disability database, the card allows them to get certain discounts and allows them to fast track when they're in long queues.
That's good to know. Are there any other questions? I think we've had a good going over there, Nigel. Thank you for that, and thank you for responding, Rebecca. The one point I wanted to make in relation to recommendation 10 is that as a local authority, we are a substantial employer, and it's really important that we're not going out telling other people how they should be supporting this initiative unless we are willing to put our shoulder to the wheel. And this is something I think when you talk to the Cabinet, as I'm sure you will be, that they kind of do their bit, because without that it's not going to succeed. Okay. Right, that's item 7. Item 8 is the work programme for 2019-20. Can we note that? Okay, well in that case you've been very well behaved, but I do think we've also got through a good bit of business and asked some very sound, sensible questions. So I thank you for all of you for your contributions, and take the rest of the evening off.